She came ready to provoke him, eyes sharp with purpose, her entire demeanor built for battle. But Barack Obama didn't take the bait. He didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't offer her the fight she was fishing for. Instead, he smiled, he waited, and then, only then, did he speak. And in that single moment, calm took the stage and never left. It wasn't the kind of calm that feels empty or passive. No, this was the calm of someone who had weathered far worse storms than this. Someone who understood that real power doesn't shout, it settles. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. It began like any other television debate, at least on the surface. Polite smiles exchanged across the table, warm greetings that sounded genuine enough for the cameras, the usual talk about how good it is to be here, how honored everyone feels, how important the conversation ahead will be. But that calm, that surface-level politeness didn't last long. It couldn't, not with these two sitting across from each other. Everyone watching, whether in the studio audience or from their living rooms at home, could sense that something bigger was waiting to unfold, something that would crack through all the pleasantries and reveal what this moment was really about. The stage looked perfect. Almost too perfect. The kind of setup designed to make everyone look good under the lights. The lights themselves were bright but soft, casting a golden glow across the table where Barack Obama and Ivanka Trump sat opposite each other. The lighting was intentional, flattering, designed to keep things looking civilized even when the words got sharp. Between them sat the moderator, a seasoned journalist known for keeping the peace when conversations got heated, someone who had mediated countless high-stakes debates and knew how to redirect tension before it exploded. But even he seemed aware that tonight might test his skills in ways he hadn't anticipated. The topic for the evening was leadership in modern America, simple on paper, yet loaded with 1,000 unspoken implications. It was one of those topics that sounds neutral, but gives everyone room to say exactly what they mean without saying it directly. Perfect for a debate like this, where history, rivalry, and ego were all sitting at the same table. Obama looked calm, just as people remembered him. Composed posture, shoulders relaxed but not slouched, his hands resting loosely in front of him. There was a gentle smile on his face, one that didn't look forced or rehearsed. His eyes carried patience, the kind that only comes from years of facing immense pressure and learning not to buckle under it. He didn't need to prove anything, not anymore. His presence alone carried weight. When he sat down, the room seemed to shift slightly, as if everyone recognized that they were in the presence of someone who had already done what most people only dream about. He had nothing left to defend, nothing left to chase, and that made him dangerous in a different way. Ivanka, on the other hand, appeared polished and confident, every inch of her carefully put together. Her hair was perfectly done, styled in that effortless way that actually takes a lot of effort. Her tone was smooth but deliberate, each word chosen with care, each sentence delivered with the precision of someone who had practiced not just what to say, but how to say it. She carried herself like someone who had rehearsed her lines, but believed in them too. This wasn't just performance for her. For Ivanka, this wasn't just another debate, another appearance, another sound bite for the evening news. It was far more personal than that. It was a chance to defend her family's image, to stand up for her father's legacy as president, to push back against all the criticisms that had piled up over the years. She wasn't just representing herself tonight. She was representing a name, a brand, a movement, and she was determined to make that clear. The moderator began with small talk, the kind designed to ease everyone into the conversation. He made a light joke about how Obama seemed to age slower than most presidents, how he looked almost the same as he did on his last day in office. Obama laughed softly, his laugh genuine and warm, the kind that puts people at ease. He brushed off the compliment with humility, saying something about good lighting and better makeup artists. Ivanka smiled politely, adding that her father often said the job of being president kept him energized, not tired. She said it with pride, as if energy and endurance were the ultimate measures of success. The audience chuckled at the exchange, appreciating the lightness before things got serious. It was all light and pleasant at first, the kind of talk that keeps audiences relaxed before the real conversation begins. The kind of intro that makes people settle into their seats, lower their guard, and believe that maybe this won't turn into a confrontation after all. But beneath those smiles, beneath the courteous nods and gentle laughter, there was an invisible tension building. You could sense it in the pauses, in the way their eyes met for a second too long, in the slight tightening of Ivanka's jaw when Obama spoke, in the way Obama's smile seemed to carry just a hint of knowing amusement. There was history in that room, deep, tangled, complicated history, political rivalry that had played out on the national stage for years, pride on both sides, ego, legacy, and two very different, completely opposing views of what power truly meant, how it should be used, and who deserved to hold it. The moderator turned to Obama first, his voice respectful but curious. Mr. President, he began, his tone inviting but professional, you've spoken many times over the years about the importance of character in leadership. What does that mean to you, especially now, looking back on everything you've experienced? Obama gave a small nod, his expression thoughtful, as if he was considering the question carefully, even though he had been asked variations of it 1,000 times before. He took a breath, not rushed, not performative, just natural. His tone was gentle yet firm when he finally spoke, each word delivered with quiet confidence. I think character, he said slowly, is what you do when no one's watching. It's how you treat people who can't give you anything in return. It's whether you stand by your principles when it's hard, when it costs you something, when it would be easier to look the other way. The audience nodded, some clapping lightly, murmuring in agreement. It was the kind of answer that felt true, that resonated because it wasn't flashy or clever. It was simple, honest, the kind of wisdom that doesn't need decoration. Ivanka listened, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp, watching him carefully. She smiled with that practiced grace she had perfected over years in the public eye, waiting patiently for her turn to respond. She wasn't going to interrupt. She didn't need to. She knew her moment was coming. The moderator turned to her next, his voice carrying the same respectful tone. Miss Trump, you've often said that your father taught you leadership through action, through example. How would you describe his approach to leadership? Ivanka's smile widened, her posture straightening slightly. There was pride in her voice, unmistakable and unapologetic. My father believes in results, she said clearly, letting the words land with emphasis. He believes that real leadership isn't about long speeches or perfect words. It's not about sounding good or looking good. It's about taking bold steps, even when people don't understand you, even when they criticize you for it, because at the end of the day, what matters is whether things actually get done. The words hung in the air for a moment, clearly aimed at Obama's calm and thoughtful style of governing. It was a subtle dig, but not subtle enough to miss. The implication was clear. Obama talked, her father acted. Obama gave speeches, her father delivered results. Obama didn't react. He kept his eyes on her, listening with full attention, his face unreadable. He didn't shift in his seat, didn't smile defensively, didn't shake his head. He simply absorbed what she was saying, letting her finish completely. The moderator sensed the comparison immediately and leaned in a bit, his journalist instincts kicking in. So, you're saying that leadership is about taking action, even if it means being misunderstood by some people? Ivanka nodded without hesitation. Exactly. Some leaders, she said, her tone sharpening just slightly, spend more time talking about unity than actually building it. My father doesn't wait for everyone to agree before doing what he believes is right. He doesn't need consensus. He needs results. A quiet murmur ran through the audience. The air in the studio thickened slightly, the temperature of the room seeming to shift. Ivanka had chosen her words carefully, but everyone knew exactly what she was implying. She wasn't just talking about leadership philosophy, she was talking about Obama, and she wanted him to know it. Obama smiled politely, that same calm expression never leaving his face. That's one way to look at it, he said softly, his tone neutral, almost conversational. But he didn't add more. He didn't defend himself. He didn't take the bait. Not yet. The moderator chuckled awkwardly, sensing the tension rising and trying to lighten the mood before it became too heavy. Well, it's nice to have both perspectives here tonight, he said, his voice a little too bright, a little too forced. But the tension was already growing, already spreading through the room like smoke. There was no stopping it now. Ivanka leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with slow, deliberate confidence. She glanced briefly at Obama, and for just a second, a smirk flickered across her face. It could have meant anything: confidence, amusement, challenge, maybe all three. But whatever it meant, one thing was clear. She was ready to go further. She had come here with a mission, and she wasn't backing down. The next question hit closer to home, much closer. The moderator's voice was steady, but you could hear the slight edge of anticipation in it, the awareness that he was about to set something in motion. What do you think, Miss Trump? He asked, looking directly at her. Is the biggest difference between your father's leadership and President Obama's? Ivanka's smile turned sharp, her eyes lighting up with the kind of energy that comes when you've been waiting for exactly this moment. She uncrossed her legs, leaned forward slightly, and spoke with absolute certainty. I think my father leads from the front, she said, her voice clear and forceful. He doesn't hide behind words. He doesn't wrap everything in eloquent language that sounds beautiful but means nothing when the cameras turn off. Some people, she continued, her tone deliberate, build legacies through speeches and memoirs, through books that tell everyone how great they were. But others, like my father, build legacies through action, through real, tangible change that people can see and feel in their everyday lives. That line changed the mood instantly. It wasn't just a political statement anymore. It wasn't just a difference of opinion about governing styles. It was personal. The audience gasped softly, a collective intake of breath, as they realized she had just taken a direct jab at Obama's post-presidential life. She was implying, not even subtly, that his accomplishments were all talk and no real action, that his legacy was built on words, not deeds, that when you stripped away the beautiful speeches and the best-selling books, there wasn't much substance underneath. Obama didn't flinch, he didn't blink, he didn't shift uncomfortably in his seat or look away. He simply tilted his head slightly, looking at her with calm curiosity, his expression almost gentle, as if he was genuinely interested in what she had to say, almost as if he was giving her permission to go on, to dig herself deeper, to say everything she came here to say. He wasn't defensive, he wasn't rattled, he was just listening, watching, waiting. Ivanka mistook his silence for hesitation. She saw his lack of reaction and interpreted it as weakness, as uncertainty, maybe even fear. And that perception gave her the confidence to push further, to go harder, to land the blow she'd been preparing for. She continued, her voice gaining momentum now, feeding off what she thought was her advantage. "It's easy to sound wise when you're not the one making the tough calls anymore," she said, her words coming faster now, sharper. "It's easy to sit back and write books and give speeches and look presidential when you don't have to face the hard decisions every single day. My father doesn't have that luxury. He's in the arena. He faces criticism, opposition, and impossible choices every single day, and he does it without flinching." The audience went completely quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound seem loud, every breath audible. Even the moderator seemed unsure whether to step in, whether to redirect the conversation, or let it play out. His hand hovered near his notes, but he didn't move. He just watched, like everyone else, waiting to see what would happen next. For a few seconds, it looked like Ivanka had won that moment. Her expression said it all, confident, certain, proud. She had delivered her message exactly the way she wanted to, and she could see the impact it was having. She had taken control of the room, or at least she thought she had. Obama remained still. No reaction, no rebuttal, no interruption. He simply looked at her, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his posture relaxed, his face calm. Those few seconds of silence felt longer than they actually were. The room seemed to hold its breath, the entire studio suspended in that moment, waiting for him to say something, anything, waiting for the comeback, the defense, the pushback, but he didn't. Not yet. He simply smiled, a calm, knowing smile. The kind of smile that doesn't come from arrogance or anger. It was the smile of someone who had heard it all before, who had been attacked in far worse ways, who knew exactly what was happening and wasn't bothered by it, a smile that hinted he was saving his response for exactly the right moment. The kind of smile that quietly said, "You think you've cornered me, but you've only given me the key." The audience didn't know it yet, didn't fully understand what they were witnessing, but that quiet patience, that deliberate silence was the calm before the storm. Obama wasn't ignoring the insult. He wasn't letting it slide. He wasn't too polite or too afraid to respond. No, he was setting the stage. He was letting her finish, letting her commit fully to her argument, letting her believe she had the upper hand, because when he finally chose to speak, when he finally broke that silence, he would turn the entire conversation upside down, and she would have nowhere to go. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. The tension in the studio grew like a quiet storm gathering strength. What had begun as a calm and respectful conversation, what had started with polite smiles and measured words, was now heavy with unspoken challenge, thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Ivanka had made her point about action over words, about results over rhetoric, and she knew it had landed. She could feel it in the room, in the way people shifted in their seats, in the murmurs that rippled through the audience. The corners of her lips lifted slightly, forming the kind of smile that hides both confidence and calculation. She wasn't finished, not yet. She had more to say, more points to make, and she wasn't going to let this moment slip away. The moderator, sensing a spark but not yet a flame, turned to Obama again, his voice careful, almost cautious. "Mr. President, how do you respond to that idea that some leaders talk about change while others actually make it happen?" Obama gave a small, measured breath, the kind that steadies the room without making a sound. His hands remained rested loosely together, fingers interlaced, his posture open and unhurried. When he spoke, his voice was steady, calm, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger, not defensiveness, just clarity, just truth. "Change," he said softly, letting the words sit for a moment, "doesn't always look loud or dramatic when it's real. Sometimes it happens quietly in places where cameras don't go, where headlines don't reach. It happens in classrooms where a kid gets health care for the first time, in hospitals where a family doesn't go bankrupt because someone got sick, in small towns where people finally have a voice, where their concerns are heard instead of dismissed. Leadership, he continued, his tone gaining quiet strength, isn't just what you do for people who agree with you, who cheer for you, who already believe in your vision. It's what you do for those who don't, for those who never voted for you, for those who will never thank you. That's the measure. The audience nodded, absorbing his words, feeling the weight of them. But before the mood could soften, before the applause could start, Ivanka jumped back in. She wasn't going to let the moment slip away, wasn't going to let him reclaim the narrative. She had come here for a purpose, and she was going to see it through. With all due respect, she said, her tone calm on the surface but edged with something sharper. Underneath, something that cut through the politeness. That sounds nice. It sounds really nice. But people don't live off words. They don't pay their bills with hope. They live off results. My father built things, real things. Not just ideas or promises, businesses, jobs, opportunity, towers with his name on them. He didn't just inspire hope in people, he created it, he gave them something tangible. The moderator looked at her, then at Obama, his expression uncertain, unsure if this was drifting too far into confrontation, if he should step in and redirect or let it play out. Obama gave no reaction. His stillness made the air feel even tighter, made the silence somehow louder, and Ivanka, seeing that stillness, mistook it for weakness again. She mistook his silence for hesitation, for lack of a response. And that misreading was what gave her the courage to push even further. She crossed one leg over the other, adjusted herself in her chair, and looked straight at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "You know," she said, her voice almost casual now, almost conversational, which somehow made it sting more. "Some people say leadership is about grace, about dignity, about how you carry yourself. And that's fine, that's a nice quality to have. But grace doesn't pay the bills. Grace doesn't put food on the table. Grace doesn't create jobs or build industries. Maybe," she said, letting the pause stretch just long enough to make sure everyone was listening, "maybe that's why so many people felt left behind during your time in office. You spoke beautifully. No one can deny that. But where was the real change? Where were the results they could see and touch?" The audience gasped again, louder this time. It wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't political debate. This was personal attack, direct, pointed, and everyone in that room felt it. Obama sat there, still not responding, still letting the moment breathe. The silence stretched on, becoming almost uncomfortable. Now the kind of silence that begs to be broken. Some people in the audience shifted in their seats. Others leaned forward, waiting. The moderator opened his mouth as if to intervene, to move things along, but then closed it again, sensing that something important was happening, that this silence meant something. And then finally Obama spoke. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't get defensive. He didn't attack back. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He asked a question. He looked directly at Ivanka, his gaze steady and calm, and said, "Can I ask you something?" Ivanka blinked, caught slightly off guard. She had expected a rebuttal, maybe a defense of his record, perhaps a counterattack, but a question that threw her. Still, she recovered quickly, her polished smile returning. "Of course," she said, her voice confident. Obama leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle but penetrating. "When you talk about your father building things, creating jobs, making real change, I respect that. I do. Building is important. Creating opportunity is vital. But I have to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer." The room went even quieter, if that was possible. Every eye was on him now, everyone sensing that whatever came next was going to matter. "Your father," Obama continued, his voice measured and calm, "has built businesses. He's created jobs, as you say. He's put his name on buildings all over the world. And I'm sure that's something you're proud of. But I have to ask you this. When those businesses failed, when those casinos went bankrupt, when those workers lost their jobs and their pensions, where was your father then? When the contractors didn't get paid, when the small businesses that worked with your father's companies went under because they never got the money they were owed, what did your father do for them?" Ivanka's expression shifted just slightly. The confidence in her eyes flickered. She started to respond, but Obama gently raised a hand, not to silence her, but to indicate he wasn't finished. His tone remained calm, almost sympathetic. "I'm not asking to attack," he said softly. "I'm asking because you brought up results. You brought up what's real and what's tangible. And I think that's fair, but results go both ways, don't they? Leadership isn't just about what you build when things are going well, it's about what you do when things fall apart. It's about who you think about when you make decisions. Is it just about the name on the building, or is it about the people who built it? Is it about the brand, or is it about the workers who make that brand possible? The audience was absolutely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. Obama's words weren't loud, weren't aggressive, but they carried a weight that filled the entire room. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was making Ivanka confront something she hadn't expected to face tonight. If you were in Ivanka's position, being asked to confront the real impact of your family's choices on millions of people, what would you say? Share your thoughts in the comments. Ivanka tried to compose herself, her jaw tightening slightly. My father has created thousands of jobs, she said, her voice a little less steady now. Businesses fail sometimes. That's the reality of the economy, but he always gets back up. He always rebuilds. Obama nodded slowly, as if considering her words. He does, he agreed, and I admire resilience. I really do. But getting back up is easier when you're the one holding the money, isn't it? When you can declare bankruptcy and walk away while other people lose everything, that's not shared risk. That's not shared sacrifice. That's someone else paying the price for your ambition. The truth of that statement hit the room like a wave. Ivanka opened her mouth to respond, but found herself struggling for words. The polished answers she had prepared, the talking points she had rehearsed, didn't seem to fit anymore. Obama hadn't attacked her with anger or accusations. He had simply held up a mirror, and now she was forced to look at what was reflected in it. Obama continued, his voice still gentle but relentless in its clarity. You talk about Grace not paying the bills. And you're right about that. Grace doesn't pay the bills. But here's what does. Policies that protect workers. Laws that make sure people get paid for the work they do. Systems that don't let the powerful exploit the vulnerable just because they can. That's what pays the bills for real people. Not towers with names on them, not brands, not slogans, actual protections, actual fairness, actual justice. He paused, letting that sink in, and then asked another question, this one even more pointed. So when you say your father creates opportunity, I want to know, opportunity for who? For people who already have money? For people who can afford to lose it and start over? Or for people who are one paycheck away from losing everything? Ivanka's face had changed completely now. The confidence was gone, the sharpness had faded. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of the conversation was pressing down on her. She tried to smile, tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear that Obama had gotten to her, not with insults or aggression, but with simple, undeniable truth. I think, she began, her voice quieter now, that my father has always fought for the American dream, for people who want to work hard and succeed. Obama nodded again, but his expression was skeptical now, not in a mocking way, but in a way that suggested he had heard this line before and didn't buy it. The American dream, he repeated softly. That's a beautiful phrase, but the American dream only works if everyone gets a fair shot at it, if the rules are the same for everyone, if hard work actually leads somewhere, not just for some people but for all people, and when the rules are written by people who benefit from keeping them rigged, when the system is designed to protect wealth instead of create it fairly, then the dream becomes just that, a dream, something nice to talk about, but impossible to reach. The audience was completely absorbed now, hanging on every word. This wasn't a debate anymore, this was a lesson. A masterclass in how to dismantle an argument without raising your voice, without resorting to insults, without losing your dignity. Ivanka sat there, her hands folded in her lap now, no longer gesturing confidently, no longer commanding the room. She looked like someone who had walked into a situation thinking they were in control and was now realizing they had never been. And then came the moment that would define the entire exchange. The moment that would be replayed on news channels, shared on social media, analyzed by commentators for days afterward. Obama looked at Ivanka with an expression that was almost gentle, almost sad, as if he genuinely felt sorry for her position. And then he asked the question that would change everything. Ivanka, he said, his voice soft but clear, can I ask you something personal? She hesitated, clearly unsure where this was going. But she couldn't refuse. Not now, not in front of all these cameras, all these people. Yes, she said quietly. Obama took a breath, and when he spoke, his words were measured, deliberate, and devastating. Barron is your son, isn't he? The question landed like a thunderclap in absolute silence. Ivanka's eyes widened slightly, confusion and alarm flickering across her face. What? No, Barron is my brother, my father's son with Melania. Obama nodded slowly, as if he had known that, as if the correction itself was part of the point he was making. Right, he said gently. I apologize, I misspoke. Baron is your brother, but you care about him, don't you? You want him to grow up in a world that's fair, that's kind, that gives him opportunities. Not because of his last name, but because of his character and his effort. Ivanka nodded, still unsure where this was going, but unable to deny the sentiment. Of course I do. Obama leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. Then let me ask you this. When you think about Baron's future, when you imagine the world he's going to inherit, do you want it to be a world where only people like him, people born into wealth and privilege, get to succeed? Or do you want it to be a world where every child, regardless of where they start, has a real chance? Ivanka opened her mouth to answer, but the words didn't come easily, because the question wasn't really about Baron. It was about her values, about what she actually believed beneath all the talking points and family loyalty. I want every child to have a chance, she finally said, her voice softer now, almost offensive. Obama nodded. I believe you, he said, and he sounded sincere. I think you mean that, but here's the problem. Wanting something and creating the conditions for it to happen are two very different things. You can want every child to have a chance while supporting policies that make sure they don't. You can talk about opportunity while defending a system that concentrates wealth at the top and leaves everyone else fighting for scraps. You can say you believe in fairness while protecting the very structures that make fairness impossible. He paused, letting that sink in, and then continued. So, when you defend your father's record, when you say he builds things and creates jobs, I need you to ask yourself who benefits, really truly benefits, not in theory, not in speeches, but in reality. Because if Baron grows up in a world where his last name is the only thing that matters, where his privilege is the only thing that protects him, then he's not living in America. He's living in an aristocracy. And that's not what this country is supposed to be. The silence that followed was crushing. Ivanka sat there, unable to respond, unable to defend, unable to do anything but absorb the weight of what had just been said. The audience was frozen, completely captivated by what they had just witnessed. Obama didn't gloat, he didn't smirk, he didn't deliver a knockout line or wait for applause. He simply sat back, his expression calm and patient, giving her space to respond if she wanted to. But she didn't, she couldn't, because in that moment she'd been confronted with something she couldn't spin, couldn't deflect, couldn't dismiss. She'd been forced to look at the contradiction at the heart of everything she was defending. And everyone in that room, everyone watching at home, could see it on her face. The realization, the discomfort, the crack in the armor. The moderator, sensing that the moment had reached its peak, tried to gently steer the conversation forward. Miss Trump, would you like to respond? Ivanka took a breath, visibly trying to regain her composure. Her hands, which had been resting calmly in her lap, now gripped the edge of the table slightly. I think, she began, her voice quieter than before, less certain, that we all want the same things. We just disagree on how to get there. It was a safe answer, a diplomatic retreat, but it wasn't a rebuttal, it wasn't a defense. It was an acknowledgement, however subtle, that she didn't have a good answer to what Obama had just laid out. Obama nodded, accepting her response without pushing further. I think that's true, he said gently. We probably do want similar outcomes. The question is whether we're willing to make the hard choices to get there, whether we're willing to confront uncomfortable truths, whether we're willing to prioritize people over profit, fairness over legacy, justice over brand. He paused, his tone softening even more. And that's not easy. It's not easy to look at your own family, your own history, and admit that maybe some of the things that benefited you came at someone else's expense. It's not easy to say, the system that worked for me is broken for others, and I need to help fix it, even if it means giving up some of my advantages. But that's what real leadership requires. Not just talking about change, not just building things, but being willing to sacrifice something of your own to make sure everyone else gets a fair shot. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't the tense, expectant silence from before. It was a reflective silence, the kind that comes when people are processing something profound, something that challenges the way they see the world. Ivanka looked down at her hands, clearly struggling with what to say next. For someone who had spent years in the spotlight, who had been trained in public speaking and media management, this was unfamiliar territory. She wasn't being attacked, she wasn't being shouted at, she was being confronted with truth, delivered calmly and respectfully, and that was somehow harder to deal with than any insult could have been. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in this story, and share your thoughts in the comments. The moderator glanced between them, sensing that the conversation had reached a critical point. I think, he began carefully, we're touching on something really important here, the question of what leadership means, what responsibility looks like. Especially when you're born into privilege, Ivanka nodded, seeming grateful for the lifeline, for something to redirect the focus. But before she could speak, Obama added one more thought, one more question that would seal the moment forever. Ivanka, he said, his voice still gentle, still calm, I don't doubt that you love your family. I don't doubt that you believe in your father, but I need to ask you something and I want you to really think about it before you answer. She looked at him, her expression guarded, but curious. Do you think, Obama continued, that the people who worked on your father's properties, the people who cleaned the rooms, who built the buildings, who served the guests, do you think they had the same opportunities you did? Do you think their children have the same future that Barron does? It was a simple question, but it cut to the core of everything. It wasn't about policy. It wasn't about politics. It was about basic human fairness, about privilege and power and who gets left behind. Ivanka's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down, then back up, clearly searching for an answer that wouldn't sound hollow, that wouldn't sound like a scripted talking point. But she couldn't find one, because the honest answer, the only real answer, was no. And everyone in that room knew it. The silence that followed was unlike anything that had come before. It wasn't tense. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, profound. It felt like the entire studio was holding its breath, waiting for her to say something, anything, but knowing that whatever she said would never be enough. Obama didn't push. He didn't demand an answer. He simply sat there, patient and calm, giving her all the time she needed. But the silence stretched on. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. People in the audience began to shift uncomfortably. The cameras stayed fixed on Ivanka's face, capturing every flicker of emotion, every moment of struggle. She looked like someone who wanted to disappear, who wanted to rewind time and start the conversation over, who wanted to be anywhere but in that chair, under those lights, facing that question. 20 seconds, 25, 30. The moderator started to speak, started to intervene, but Obama gave him a subtle look, a small shake of the head that said, "Let her answer. She needs to answer this." 35 seconds, 40, and then, finally, at 41 seconds, the longest 41 seconds anyone in that room had ever experienced, Ivanka spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I don't know," she said. "I honestly don't know." It wasn't a defense. It wasn't a justification. It was an admission, a confession, really, an acknowledgement that she had never thought about it that deeply, that she had lived her entire life in a bubble of privilege so thick that she had never truly considered what life was like for people outside of it. Obama nodded slowly, his expression compassionate rather than triumphant. "Thank you for being honest," he said softly. "That's more than most people in your position would say." The audience remained silent, absorbing what had just happened. This wasn't a political victory. This wasn't a gotcha moment. This was something deeper. This was someone being forced to confront their own blindness, their own complicity, and doing so in front of millions of people. Ivanka's eyes were slightly glassy now. Not with tears exactly, but with the emotion of someone whose entire worldview had just been shaken. She had come here to defend her father, to defend her family's legacy, to push back against years of criticism. But instead, she had been confronted with questions she couldn't answer, truths she couldn't deny, and a perspective she had never fully considered. The weight of those 41 seconds hung in the air like smoke. They would be replayed on every news channel, analyzed by every commentator, shared across every social media platform. 41 seconds of silence that said more than any speech ever could. Obama leaned back in his chair, his voice steady and reflective. "You know," he said, "I think the hardest part of being in a position of power is recognizing that your comfort, your success, your privilege often comes at someone else's expense. And the first step toward real leadership, toward real change, is being willing to look at that honestly, not to defend it, not to justify it, but to acknowledge it and then ask yourself, what am I going to do about it?" Ivanka nodded, still unable to fully meet his gaze. She looked like someone who had been disarmed, not by aggression, but by compassion, by truth delivered without malice. What followed was almost anticlimactic. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but the energy had shifted completely. Ivanka tried to recover, tried to steer the discussion toward safer ground, toward her family's accomplishments and her father's vision for America, but every word felt hollow now. Every statement filtered through the lens of those 41 seconds of silence. Obama didn't interrupt her. He didn't contradict her. He simply listened, nodding occasionally, letting her speak, but his silence was its own response. It said, "I've already made my point. You've already revealed yourself. There's nothing more that needs to be said." The audience could feel it too. The applause when Ivanka made a point was polite but muted. The energy had drained from the room. People weren't here for a debate anymore. They were here to witness something they had never seen before, Someone from one of the most powerful families in America being forced to confront the reality of their privilege in real time, on live television, with no escape route. When the moderator finally brought the conversation to a close, thanking both guests for their time and their honesty, Ivanka stood up quickly, almost too quickly. She shook Obama's hand, her smile forced and tight, her eyes avoiding his. "Thank you for the conversation," she said, her voice barely audible. Obama smiled gently, holding her hand for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for being here," he said. "These conversations aren't easy, but they're necessary." She nodded, not trusting herself to say more, and turned to leave. As she walked off stage, the echo of her heels clicking against the floor was the only sound in the studio. Every step she took carried the weight of everything that had just happened. The pride she had arrived with was gone. The confidence had crumbled, and in its place was something raw and real, the understanding that she had been outmatched, not by aggression or cruelty, but by grace. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Obama remained on stage for a moment longer. The moderator turned to him, clearly still processing what they had all just witnessed. "Well, Mr. President," he said with a half-smile, "that was certainly one of the most memorable conversations I've ever moderated." Obama chuckled lightly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Just a conversation," he replied, "though sometimes conversations tell us more than we expect." The audience laughed, the sound releasing some of the heaviness that had filled the room. But underneath that laughter there was something else: respect, admiration, the recognition that they had just witnessed something rare and important. Obama straightened in his chair, his voice taking on a more reflective tone. "You know," he said, "we all say we want truth, we say we value honesty, integrity, accountability, but the truth has this funny way of making people uncomfortable, especially when it comes too close to home. The hardest thing isn't hearing the truth, it's admitting it when it's staring you in the face." The moderator nodded thoughtfully. "That's a powerful observation." "Leadership," Obama continued, his voice calm but commanding, "isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, even when those questions make people uneasy, especially then. Because if we're not willing to ask hard questions, if we're not willing to confront uncomfortable truths, then we're not really leading, we're just managing appearances." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. "And when power is treated like a family heirloom, something to be passed down and protected at all costs, it stops serving the people and starts protecting itself. That's when nations lose their way. That's when the gap between the powerful and the powerless becomes a canyon. And the truth," he said, looking up at the crowd with that steady, unwavering gaze, "always finds a way to bring them back." It wasn't an attack, it wasn't directed at anyone by name, but everyone knew who he meant. Everyone understood the deeper message. This wasn't just about one family or one administration. It was about the nature of power itself, about who gets to hold it and why, about what happens when privilege becomes so normalized that people stop questioning it. The moderator smiled, clearly moved by Obama's words. "You always have a way of ending things on a powerful note," he said. Obama smiled back, that small, knowing smile that had become his trademark. "I just believe words should leave people thinking, not arguing. If we're all just shouting at each other, trying to win points, then we're not actually communicating, we're performing, and I've never been interested in performance. I'm interested in progress." The audience erupted in applause, louder this time, more sustained. Not because of a clever comeback or a witty line, but because of the fundamental truth and wisdom in what he had said. This wasn't victory through humiliation, this wasn't triumph through cruelty, this was victory through restraint, through patience, through the quiet power of asking the right questions at the right time. Backstage, away from the cameras and the lights, Ivanka stood in front of a mirror, her reflection staring back at her. She touched up her makeup with hands that weren't quite steady, trying to compose herself, trying to rebuild the armor that had been so carefully dismantled over the past hour. She had faced tough interviews before, hostile journalists, aggressive questioners, but this had been different. This had been someone who challenged her without attacking, who made her question herself without ever being cruel. The debate was over, but the echo of it, that single, devastating question about Barron and what it really represented, those 41 seconds of silence that felt like an eternity, would linger far longer than anyone expected, and in that echo, Obama's calm voice would always remain steady and clear, reminding everyone who heard it that real power isn't about dominance. It's not about who can shout the loudest or attack the hardest. Real power is about dignity. It's about having the strength to ask difficult questions and the courage to face difficult truths. It's about understanding that leadership isn't a birthright or a brand, it's a responsibility, and that responsibility requires more than confidence or charisma. It requires character, What do you think Obama understood about power that Ivanka didn't? How would you have responded to that question if you were in her position? Let me know in the comments below. This story isn't just about Barack Obama and Ivanka Trump. It's about all of us. It's about the questions we avoid, the truths we deny, the privileges we defend without examining. It's about what happens when we're finally forced to look in the mirror and see ourselves clearly. If this story made you think, if it challenged you, if it resonated with you in any way, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to Celebrity Chronicles if you haven't already, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what struck you most. Tell me what questions you're left with. Tell me what you learned. Because stories like this matter. Conversations like this matter. And the more we engage with them honestly, the more we're willing to ask ourselves hard questions and sit with uncomfortable truths, the closer we get to building the kind of world where everyone, not just the privileged few, gets a real chance. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And remember, real power isn't about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can speak the truth with grace, with patience, and with unwavering conviction that a better world is possible. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep fighting for a world where leadership means service, where privilege means responsibility, and where everyone's voice matters. This has been Celebrity Chronicles. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, don't forget to think for yourself.